Willkommen zu Stimmenfang, dem Politik-Podcast von Spiegel Online. Diese Episode ist eine Bonusfolge für unsere englischsprachigen Spiegel Online-Nutzer. Was sind die wichtigsten Themen so kurz vor der deutschen Bundestagswahl? Meine Kollegen Charles Hawley und Daryl Lindsay haben das in einem spannenden Gespräch mit unserer Chefredakteurin Barbara Hans zusammengefasst. Viel Spaß beim Hören.
Hi there and welcome to our German election podcast. My name is Charles Hawley, and with me today to talk about the campaign so far is my colleague Daryl Lindsay.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And Spiegel Online editor-in-chief Barbara Hans.
Hiya, thanks for having me.
Barbara, when Angela Merkel first announced her intention to run for her fourth term, she seemed really tired. It seemed like she didn't really want to run for a fourth term. And the German electorate seemed like they didn't really want her to run either. And then Martin Schulz threw his hat into the ring, and immediately his Social Democrats skyrocketed in the polls to 32%, almost equal to Merkel's Conservatives. And then his popularity started slipping very, very quickly. Now we have just a few days to go till the election, and the SPD stands at 20%. What happened?
Well, that's a really good question. What happened? I think Schulz has had a real roller coaster ride in the past few months. When he was elected candidate for chancellor, the euphoria was great, especially young people appealed to what he told them about his past, about his biography and all of that. And he seemed to be a beacon of hope for the socialists, basically. And it is his merit to unite the party. But what was lacking were political approaches and ideas of their own. And the SPD has tried again and again to set new topics, to address problems. But the ideas haven't really caught on.
Is that a communication problem with the SPD, or is there a credibility gap? I mean, I'm thinking here about Gerhard Schröder back in the 2000s, and he passed these really tough welfare reforms, deep cuts to unemployment benefits. And is that still sort of a millstone around the neck of the SPD?
I'm not sure about that. I think that people really did not understand what Martin Schulz stands for and what the SPD stands for after so many years of government in the Grand Coalition. So it wasn't really visible what were his ideas. And I think poverty and all of those topics which he tried to set really didn't make it, basically, into the debate, even though those are really profound social topics and problems in Germany. But basically, the majority of people are really much better off than they were a couple of years ago. So those people who are affected by poverty tend not to be those people to go to the election and to take part.
You raise an interesting point, actually, the Grand Coalition. So that is the pairing of Merkel's conservatives with Schulz's social democrats. That has been the coalition in Germany for 2 of the last 3 electoral periods, and could very well be the next one as well, which makes it really hard for the Social Democrats to say, wait, we can do it better, because they've been part of the government that whole time.
Yeah, and they really passed a lot of laws and ideas. To that extent, one could say that the last couple of years have been politically effective, right? But that's a rather cynical approach, because what we really hadn't had were political debates, because if the consensus is that large, who's really the opponent, right? And I think this was an issue that has been discussed intensively, that the SPD has lost so much of its approval, above all, because people do not understand why they should vote for Scholz, what he actually wants in difference to Merkel, and to what extent has he got different ideas to Angela Merkel, and the concepts seem to be very similar to so many people.
One of the things that we're noticing right now is that there's a desire for stability in Germany, and the Grand Coalition has actually brought a lot of that stability. You know, it seems that German voters have always preferred stability over political experiments. There's only been one time in Germany's post-war history that voters have not returned at least one party from a coalition government to power. This year, though, there seems to be a much more pronounced desire for stability. Are we seeing a Trump effect, or are we seeing a Brexit effect with all of these major destabilizing events happening in the world?
Yeah, this puts us at the heart of the matter, I think. Foreign policy plays a decisive role in the upcoming elections. The impression is that the world is going crazy, right? The British want to leave the EU, Trump seems unpredictable, Erdogan to Turkey says goodbye to democracy, and Merkel, on the other hand, stands for stability and reliability to so many people, especially in foreign policy. People have the feeling that they know her, and that is the CDU's strategy in the election campaign, right? Just one sentence of Angela Merkel saying, "You know me." That's what she said in the 2013 campaign, and it ended up being more or less her slogan. And I think that is also the dominant feeling in this election.
Yeah, this time around she has an election poster. It's a picture of her and the date of the election. That's it.
Yeah,
it's
that's
like,
it.
Vote
That's
for me.
enough. Because that is the message, right? You don't have to tell a lot of things about her, but people tend to pretend that they know her as they know their neighbor or whoever.
And that idea of "you know me," I mean, Martin Schulz has come in after a 20-year career in Brussels. Has that harmed his election prospects here?
Well, yes, I think so. The fact that he wasn't present in Berlin the last couple of years and that he was not actually involved in German politics is sort of a malus of him.
Yeah, and one of the things that Schulz has tried to do is to accuse Merkel of quashing democratic debate, because as we know, Merkel likes to take long times before she makes decisions.
Absolutely.
And then she sort of waits to see where the wind is blowing, and then she makes her decision. And Schulz has said that this is an attack on democracy. Is there something to that, you think?
Yeah, I think so. In Germany, it is often said that Merkel is so authentic and that she does not stage herself. And on the contrary, this is Merkel's way of staging herself, I think. It always seems as if she's only concerned with the matter and as if she decides rationally and prudently, the physicist, right?
Right.
That's the image. And that is exactly what Merkel's staging is, not the opposite of staging, but rather Merkel's way of doing it. And the people believe her, and it's really hard to try to attack her verbally, and what Schulz tried to do, to, get one impulsive reaction. That's not what's going to happen.
Forget it. No, it's not going to work.
You just said, Merkel, the physicist, that's also how she's seen elsewhere in the world. People see her as this sort of, Gibraltar rock of stability in Europe. And, she's also, since Trump's election, she's been hailed as the leader of the free world. It's a role that she's very reluctant to take on. Does that have to do with her modesty? Or is it a hesitance that comes with an understanding of the historical irony in this? I mean, Germany has a very difficult history with World War II.
Yeah, of course.
Is that part of it?
I think Merkel doesn't like this attribution because she generally doesn't like attributions. One has to know that she's reluctant in that. She's often underestimated, right? And that gives her an enormous freedom. If you're underestimated, people do not really know what's going to happen. And on the one hand, she's harmless, and then she enforces her interests. And of course, the rejection of this role also has to do with German history. And of course, Germany must assume responsibility in the world, and the German Chancellor cannot fail to accept this responsibility.
Do German voters see her sort of the same way? I mean, in the States, when you read about Merkel, it's like, sometimes, the Iron Chancellor, you've heard that she can stand up to people like Putin and Erdogan and Trump as well. Do people in Germany see her the same way?
I think so. I think that's one very important issue, because she can oppose Putin and Erdogan because she doesn't get involved in the game, right? That's where we are back at this point of underestimation, basically. Yeah. And this is the way things are perceived in Germany, I think. Those men you just mentioned are despots, and Merkel can't be provoked. She's not part of the game, and it would be fatal to continue those discussions and further radicalize the political discourse.
So do you think that the unease about the world situation makes people more likely to vote for Merkel?
I think so. Yeah, because she seemed to be the opposite to those men and the way they act and all of that. And she's the scientist. And those ones are the ones who really speak out loud all of the time, and that's what she doesn't. Exactly. If you think of that, that's basically all of the conflict in a nutshell, right? Trump and his opposition to science, and then you've got the science lady on the other side, the scientist, right, basically.
In terms of Trump in the campaign, both candidates have made very strong statements about President Trump. They did so during the TV debate that happened at the beginning of September. Speaking of Charlottesville, Schulz said in the debate, "A man who is unable to distance himself from a Nazi mob, a German chancellor has to say, 'Your politics, Mr. President, will never be the politics of Germany.'" And speaking of relations in general, Merkel said, "We have serious differences with the American president, but also a serious need to work together." What kind of relationship is the next German chancellor likely to have with this unpredictable president?
Well, that's hard to predict, basically, because in the meantime, you get the impression that after getting up with a tweet, Trump really can change world politics. And I think a German chancellor must deal with this unpredictability, and that's not something Merkel likes, and maybe not something she really is easy in dealing with. But a German chancellor must oppose it, right? And on the other hand, one could say that Trump's unpredictability is his predictability, so to say. I think one has to have very clear ideas and also trust in the American administration, because US politics is not just Trump.
Merkel doesn't seem to be afraid of Trump either. There's a famous anecdote that was in The Economist that after her first meeting with him in Washington, D.C., she flew back and she aped him. She sort of hunched forward and reenacted the way that he, was in her press conferences in front of reporters on the airplane. That's been pretty widely reported. So she doesn't seem to be timid when it comes to dealing with Trump.
No, I think she's got a good humour. She doesn't really show it publicly, but I think to her, Donald Trump is a really Zumutung, whatever that might be in English.
She has to really put up with a lot.
Yeah, let's put it that way.
A huge challenge.
Yeah, I think he is really a huge challenge for her, because he's so out with regard to so many things which are really of importance to her, so that she can approach things in a very structured way, and that she can analyze what's happening next. And I think personally that is hugely demanding for her to deal with someone like Donald Trump.
So we've talked a lot about what Germans think of Merkel, what people abroad think of Merkel, but we haven't yet really talked about the elephant in the room, and that's the refugee crisis. Something that Merkel at least looked for a long time like she'd be vulnerable on when it came to the campaign. Gerhard Schroeder famously said that Merkel has a heart, but no plan.
Right.
Is that really true anymore? I mean, we've gotten to the point where the CDU, her party, has tightened up refugee policy, focused on deportations. Is it true that she no longer has a plan?
Well, at least the plan isn't really visible to so many people. And many people in Germany are afraid of the effects of the refugee crisis and how integration can succeed. And it is an important issue in the election campaign, but one that the major parties would prefer to avoid, basically, because they have no real answers to people's fears, or their answers don't really reach the people.
Is she doing enough to focus on integration, do you think? I mean, as people in the States are fond of saying that Germany is ruining itself by allowing in so many Muslims, or not people in the States, but a certain clientele in the States is saying this. Is she focusing on integration? You don't hear about it at all in the campaign.
No, that's because, it's so connected with people's fears, and by talking about the different options or perspectives on integration, the parties are afraid that by mentioning the topic, they sort of get infected, right? And that they can't really make their points in what happened. And one has to say that a lot of things really went on very well in the last couple of months, but not because of politics, but because people were extremely engaged in helping on local levels and all of that. My impression is that the parties don't have the impression that you can make any points or gain any voters by talking about the refugees.
So with the mainstream parties, this is not a major issue in the election campaign. It's just something that has been in the margins largely.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, this goes in with the debate that we just had, one of the few areas where there really was a bit of division was on the refugee issue. But it also, Schulz fought a bit with Merkel about her not cutting a deal with other European leaders before letting hundreds of thousands of refugees come in. But that was really the only major fighting point to them. Is this possibly another reason that Schulz is unable to sort of make up the lost ground to Merkel? I mean, there's just not that much division between the two, and there's so much similarity. One of the things that struck me during the debate was that they seemed like the two people who had just considerable admiration for each other, who sat down for a debate and just nodded approvingly at each other for 90 minutes. Compared to the debate in the U.S., it was downright civilized. I mean, Schulz didn't call Merkel a nasty lady the way that Trump did Clinton. Overseas, people are looking at this campaign in Germany and they're admiring the civility that they're seeing, and it's the civility that's being criticized here, but it's made it tough for Schulz to make a lot of headway. Would you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. At that point, we're back to the Grand Coalition. When talking about the refugee crisis, the SPD and the CDU decided together on everything that happened in the last couple of months. So it's really hard for Schulz to pretend that he opposes what has happened. And obviously no one in the SPD would really say that it was a wrong decision, to open up the borders. What there is a debate about is the question, did Merkel really had a plan at that time on how integration can work? But I think Merkel and Schulz really appreciate each other. They really do. And that is a problem, or one of the biggest problems of this election campaign, because the consensus is very great. And the voters noticed that. Merkel, I think, would prefer to continue in the Grand Coalition. However, this would mean that the AfD will gain momentum because so many important debates are not controversial right now.
Yeah, I mean, Merkel and Schulz, they like each other a lot.
They do,
and also the other aspect is that Merkel has moved her party into the center or even to the center left of the political spectrum by adopting all sorts of issues that the SPD used to lead on. One of the parties that's benefiting from this consensus is the Alternative for Deutschland, or Alternative for Germany, the right-wing populist party, also known as the AfD, which you said. And they, a few months ago, it looked like they were done. They had 7%. They were arguing. They couldn't agree on anything. They hated each other. And they were making bad headlines, basically. But now, suddenly, they're at 12% in the polls. As of a poll that I read yesterday, it looks like they're rising. What's going on?
Well, I think you're right. It's one of the facts is that the consensus leaves not enough space for debates, really. And that's something where the AfD jumps in, and the AfD benefits from the fact that it fosters people's fears. And the party pretends that there is no freedom of expression in Germany, which obviously is nonsense. But the motto is, finally someone says it. In German, you would say, endlich sagt's mal einer. And I think the representatives of the AfD pretend to break taboos by addressing issues, but there are no such taboos.
Yeah, right. They set up these straw men, they knock them down, act real tough.
Well, except that the taboos are being broken is that they're sort of, they say that they're moving away from political correctness, which means that it allows, speech that borders on racism or is directly racist,
exactly.
Like you're seeing with the alt-right in the U.S.
Yeah, that's exactly the same. And one thing we see wherever there are really populist parties rising, that's the concept behind it.
Yeah, they're very similar. And in Germany, there used to be a really strong firewall against anything that smelled like right-wing extremism. And that firewall seems to be becoming a little bit weaker. I mean, with the amount of support that the AfD gets, for one, in the polls, but also in some of the protests that have been going on in eastern Germany, Dresden, the Pegida. Yeah. And the things that people think it's okay to say now are quite a bit different than they were several years ago. Is that really happening? I mean, is this firewall slowly getting weaker?
I mean, we know from social studies that 10 to 15% of the German population have latent racist thoughts, right? And but you're perfectly right. In the past, people didn't talk about it, and now the AfD is a party that makes it seemingly, apparently, socially acceptable to talk in such ways. And there is an outcry, right? There is a lot of debate about that. But no one really knows what kind of candidates the AfD has and how that really changes the culture and the attitude of the Bundestag. And the culture of political debate has shifted in the last couple of months because you had several publicists which tried to mingle with the AfD and this way of populist sentences and opinions, really.
When you said journalists mingled with them, what do you mean by that? Like they had journalists actively in there, or?
Yeah, you have journalists who came from a conservative stance and now sort of flirt with the AfD political positions, and they know that by doing this and by provoking an outcry, you are in the news. That is something which we have seen in the last couple of months, and this has been fostered by social media, because we know that a lot of AfD debates are big on Facebook and on Twitter, and that is a difference, and that is one of the major differences to the debates in the last couple of years or decades, that in your filter bubble you get the reaction that there are more people thinking like you think, whilst in the past you had those debates in the Stammtisch, whatever that might be in English, in the bar, with your fellow neighbours or whatever.
In all likelihood, right now, AfD is going to get into parliament for the first time. How is this going to change Germany? Because suddenly these things that have been in the headlines or that you've seen on television are going to become a part of the parliamentary debate in a parliament that has succeeded for more than 60 years in keeping far-right parties out. How is this going to change Germany?
I think that's the biggest question with regard to the next couple of years. How is this going to change political debate and political debate in the Bundestag, but also in society in general? And no one really knows, because this party is not just one set of people or stereotypes. There are really openly racist people who belong to the AfD, and you've got people who tend to come from a rather Eurosceptical background, which maybe have a different set of mind. We do not know yet. And we do not know all the other parties, whether the Liberal Democrats or the Socialists or the Greens, they've all said that no one is willing to cooperate with the AfD, but still, nevertheless, they get a bigger forum to set their ideas and to get publicity. And it's a big question for the German media as well. And I think there's no such a way to ignore it if, as Charles just said, and as the polls look like right now, they're going to make it more or less 10% or even more. Yeah. We just can't ignore it. There's a phenomenon, and we as journalists have to deal with it, right? Mm.
You've just been discussing the media and how they will have to deal with reacting to the AfD in this new elevated role. But we've seen from this election that the AfD has taken their cue from the Trump campaign, and they've been extremely active on social media. At that point, can the media really do much to contain it or to, sort of report truths when lies are being told, when they actually have a very large platform on their own that they can go directly to their voters and people who are have an affinity to the party or sympathize with them?
Of course, they do not need us. None of the parties does, right? That's different to political campaigns a couple of years ago, that the gatekeeping function of the media has been eroded by social media. Do I think that's bad? No, of course not, right? There's no such thing as going back and wanting us, Facebook or Twitter, to disappear. But what we have to take into account is that political debate changes dramatically by the political parties and especially the AfD addressing their followers directly through Facebook or Twitter. And I think what is important to us as journalists is that we have to redefine our role. We're no longer the gatekeepers. What is our role? And I think it is our job to oppose those lies by fact-checking and by interviewing the politicians of the AfD and confronting them with those myths they try to publish, and be even more factual and do our job.
Do you think it's pretty clear that Merkel's going to win the election, right? So we're not allowed to say that, but it's pretty clear. So she's going to enter into her fourth term, right? So we're talking year 12 to 16. A possible return of the Grand Coalition with the SPD. Is that going to help the right-wing populists? Because their entire game is bashing on the establishment. And here comes the establishment again.
I think so, yes. Because we've got that concentration in the middle of political ideas, and if people get the impression that it doesn't really make a difference whether you vote for the CDU or the SPD, that's something really the AfD can make rounds on. On the one hand, stability might be good. We talked about foreign policy and all of that. But with regard to the German debates and with regard to the refugee crisis, who is going to be the one or the party who really brings in different ideas on integration or who questions what is going on? Because the bubble in the middle is getting larger and larger. We know from other countries that there is such a thing as a radicalization at the margins, and that's something the AfD can really make rounds on. Not that I want that, but that is something that has been happening in France, for example,
Austria,
and we have these
Belgium.
debates in Belgium, in Austria, to a certain extent in the UK, and that's not a German phenomenon. But I think for many years Germany thought that we were immune against such a movement, and apparently we're not.
It looks like we're running out of time. But one final question. And again, we're going to presuppose, well, actually, it doesn't really matter. Chancellor Merkel, Chancellor Schulz, it doesn't really matter that much in terms of their stance on the European Union.
Right.
They both love Europe.
They both love Europe. They're both big fans of Europe. They both want to bring Europe forward. But what does that mean for the European Union and the French-German motor going forward?
Yeah, I think Germany needs Europe, obviously. But the refugee crisis will be about finding European answers to that question. Which country opens up its borders to how many refugees? How can the costs be shared? And the coming years are expected to be of great importance for the EU. And as you just mentioned, the relationship between Germany and France is going to be crucial for that, because I think with regard to international politics, we need a further integration with regard to what Trump really tries to make his points on. It is important that Europe stands together, but as we see, there's no such thing as this one Europe, but you've got a variety of interests, especially with regard to economic questions and issues. And I'm really curious what's going to happen with the French-German relationship in the next couple of years.
Well, especially given that Brexit is about to happen in 2019.
Yeah, and what we see is that Brexit is going to happen, whilst a majority of the British doesn't really necessarily want it to happen anymore, and whilst May is trying to make her point that, with regard to economic issues, everything more or less shall stay the same as it is, many, many topics really to talk about.
Well, with that, we've come to the end of our pre-election podcast. Thank you very much, Barbara Hans, for joining Daryl, Lindsay, and myself, Charles Hawley, to offer your insights. And thank you for listening to this special English language episode of Spiegel Online's pre-election podcast series.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Das war die englische Bonus-Episode zu unserem Politik-Podcast. Die nächste reguläre Folge von Stimmenfang erscheint wie gewohnt am Donnerstag.